I think the time has come to finally replace the clutch in my 1974 Porsche 914. I've gone through most everything else in the car, as you might have seen from the other videos on my channel. But the other day I was driving up a hill in third gear and the transmission was slipping a little bit, which is a telltale sign that the clutch is on its way out. Now, I've never changed a clutch in a Porsche 914, although the principles are the same across every car. So we'll learn something together. Let's get started. Well, obviously, in order to change the clutch, you got to separate the transmission from the engine. You could do that in the car, or in this case, I've got the engine out. There are 4 bolts that hold the transmission to the engine. They're 17 millimeter. This one's a little tricky, the one that doubles as the starter anchor, kind of hidden down in there. Otherwise, they're pretty straightforward. The 2 nuts on the bottom side of the transmission go to studs that are embedded into the case. Now, this bolt on the starter is a little different because it's designed to lock in place. You see the flat edge of the nut is against the starter, so you have to remove it from inside the engine compartment. Really important is you make sure you pull your reverse switch so it doesn't get hung up. Now we're just going to wrestle the transmission off the engine, and it's out. Okay, I've got my transmission on a little mover's dolly, and it's separated from the engine here. And let's take a look. It looks like the clutch was last changed in 1991, or at least the pressure plate was. Now I'll get the engine up on a stand so it'll be easier to work with. Just using a Harbor Freight crane to do this. Here are the parts we're going to need to do this job. There's the pressure plate, nice and new. And here's the clutch disc itself. This is a 6-spring version. And then we have a bunch of miscellaneous parts. This is the rear main oil seal, which definitely makes sense to replace as long as you're in there. You don't want to have to go and take this whole thing apart just to replace the seal in a couple hundred miles if it starts leaking. So there's that. We have flywheel bolts. We have the felt washer, which goes underneath this piece. We have the O-ring, which goes into the flywheel. We have the alignment tool, which we're going to need. And we also have the bearing, which is going to go in the middle of the flywheel. I also bought another flywheel just in case the one that's on the car can't be resurfaced. And it's been nearly 50 years, so it's probably time. Here's a super handy tool. It's a flywheel lock. And you'll need this to get some leverage on the bolts to get them out, especially the flywheel bolts. And what happens is this sits in the teeth of the flywheel, and this bolt goes into the case. So it really locks things down. And there's 2 different sizes in terms of pitch for the gear. That's the one for this car. Now that it's in, it's locked down pretty tight. You don't even have to tighten this bolt, really. It just needs to sit there enough to engage the flywheel, which it has. So now we'll start taking off the pressure plate bolts. And we'll just take these out. Now we'll see if we can pry off the pressure plate. Almost there. This one's actually going to pull the pin. Okay. Oh my. Well, see some of the blue there. It means it's burned. You can see inside here in the flywheel, there's lots of grooves. It's definitely done. Glad I bought a new one. You can see there's a lot of dust and debris in there, and there could be some asbestos, so you got to be careful vacuuming it up. I have to get these flywheel bolts off, so I'm going to put the lock in one more time. Got this breaker bar, and these are 17 millimeter bolts. Okay, that's one broken. Okay, that's another one. This yoke is really handy because it still provides you a lot of access. This is really a knuckle buster here because you'll hit the flywheel with your fingers. It hurts. Okay, so there's the old washer. your way around and not slam your thumb in the process like I just did. Okay. And it's free. And here's the rear main seal. You have to be really careful when we pull the seal not to nick the case. And I got a seal puller here. So I'm gonna try to do this and not hook into any part of the case itself. You can see it's starting to come out now. Just gotta be super careful. And there we go. So just to give you a little shot of what's going on with that seal puller, is this goes in here like this, and you can see that it just is pulling on that part. I wasn't ever letting it get all the way to here, just pulling on that.
And here around the crankshaft are the end play shims. There are 3 of them, and they add up to a specific thickness so that the end play is within spec.
Here on the bench, we can get a closer look at this trashed flywheel. You can see all the grooves. See these blue spots also, they indicate burning. So we need to transplant these locating pins for the pressure plate onto the new pressure plate, and they're pretty tight in there, so I hit them with some PB Blaster, and I'll come back in a little bit. And here's the other side of the flywheel. So you can see that the bearing is a little bit proud here. When I push the new one in, I'm going to do it from this side, so I just won't push it all the way, and that's how I'll get that little relief. Here's the new flywheel. Cue the angelic music. Keep in mind that there is a top and bottom of this bearing. So you see that the lip edge goes to the top of the flywheel as it sits right now. See how that looks different than the other side. So we can get this started with a rubber mallet, but I'm going to use a press to put it in, and then a little grease in the needle bearings in there. So I'm just going to get it started here so that it's nice and even. Let's get the flywheel on the press. Nothing like a press. To get the other pins out, I'm just going to use a drift in here and then just bang on it. Now I'll just transfer these pins into the new flywheel. Since the flywheel's toast end needs to be replaced, I'm definitely going to have to check crank end play. It's always a good idea to check it whenever you're changing the clutch, but especially when you have to replace a component like the flywheel, because it could just be a tiny little bit thicker or thinner than the other. And if the crank end play isn't set correctly, you could prematurely wear the bearings and maybe even trash the case. So it's really, really important to do. And it's not really difficult, but you will need a dial gauge. So what we're going to do is we'll measure each one of these shims. You can tell that this one is 38, 32, also 38. So what we'll do is we're going to put 2 of them back. I'll use a 38 and the 32. Make sure they're nice and clean. We'll leave this third one out for now because we want to see what the end play is, and then we'll do a calculation, see if we can either reuse these shims or if we need different size ones. I'll give you a sense of how much play there is in the crank here. You'll see if I push on it, see it goes all the way back there. That's a lot of play. It needs to move a little bit so that it floats as the engine moves. So what we want to get is 3 to 5 thousandths. So we'll get the flywheel here and make sure the indexing pin is in the right spot. Now notice there's no seal on the engine here right now. That's intentional. We want to measure the crank end play without the seal. So now we use the old washer here because we don't want to trash a new one, just to get things measured up.
The shop manual says that the flywheel bolts should be torqued to 79.5 pounds, and they need to be torqued so that you can get an accurate end play measurement.
Here's the rig. The magnet goes on the flywheel. and the feeler goes up against the case. Make sure that everything's really rigid so you get a good reading. $18. Yep, 18. And you shouldn't have to pry this too much. $18 thousandths, that's the difference. Okay, the way we make up the difference is to use shims of varying thicknesses. These are all from the Type 4 store. We got a 24, 30, 32, 34, and 36. The reason why there's 3 shims here is because of lubrication. Really, there's like a cushion of oil that lubricates in between these shims. And the 3 is the magic number to reduce wear and make sure that everything's spinning smoothly. If you have to go to 4, it means your engine's probably toast. And 2 is not good either, so it should be 3 and only 3. Put the shim stack in, and now we'll put the flywheel on. Spec says 79.5, so I'm just gonna back off a half from 80. All right. Now let's measure it up. All right, the gauge is set up, perpendicular to the case. I've zeroed it out. Let's see where we're at. And it looks like we're at a perfect 3 with everything torqued. We'll push it back and it goes back to 0. One more time, check it in another spot. And it goes back. So now we'll take the flywheel off and get everything sealed up for real. And sometimes when you pull the flywheel off, the shim will stick to it, so be careful that you don't drop them on the floor. You don't want to get them dirty. Now it's time to put the seal in, and you really shouldn't need a hammer or anything. I just use a little wood shim and press. And it seems to go in. I put a little Yama bond on the seal just to give it a little extra oomph. Make sure that this is flat. You don't really have to use the Yama bond, but this is the 10mm seal, not the 12mm seal. And I just want a little extra layer of protection. Couldn't get the 12mm seal in time. So the moral of the story is order the 12mm seal. Now before we put the flywheel on, I'm just gonna put a little lube on the seal here so that on startup it doesn't burn the seal and trash it. Making sure everything is clean is really important with sealing surfaces. Now here's the O-ring. A lot of people forget to put this in, supposedly, but it goes into a recess here in the flywheel. Here's the felt washer, and that goes between the flywheel and this lock washer. And they call it a lock washer because the bolts have like teeth on them, and the teeth kind of dig into this, which is why you see those scratch marks. Felt washer in position. Make sure that that felt washer is even and in between the lock washer and the flywheel. Now we'll take these up to 79.5 foot-pounds using crisscross pattern. And again, I'm going to clean this out. Make sure that there's no grease or oil or anything that could potentially ruin the mating surface of the clutch. Now I'll put the clutch in, and I have to take the alignment tool and kind of hide that into the stand so that when everything gets pushed up against the flywheel, I can push the alignment tool through. I'm going to get this surface clean. Make sure there isn't anything on it from the factory. Now I'll put the pressure plate in position. My clutch alignment tool is in the stand here. I'm going to get that all lined up as soon as I have my dowel pins sorted. It's kind of hidden, but pushing the alignment tool in, you'll definitely feel when it hits home and goes all the way in. Then we'll start to put the bolts in for the pressure plate. Get this torqued to 14.5 pounds. I like this beeping torque wrench. Okay, now that everything is torqued to 14.5, I can pull this out. And there you have it. Well, that's it. The clutch, the flywheel, and the pressure plate have been replaced. And now I'll just put the engine back into the car, and it'll probably be good for another 80,000 miles or so. If you like my videos, please subscribe. Just hit that button right there. Good luck and be safe.